G'day and welcome to episode 78 of The Other Side with Damian Coory, and this is number one of 3 summer series episodes for the next few weeks. We're going to be bringing you the best bits from all of our shows in 2021. This is our summer series, and it's going to run until December 22, every Wednesday night from now till December 22. And episode 80 on December 22 will be our final show for 2021. And it'll be our final show with Discernible, which is very sad, before I head off for 5 months to run my campaign for the Liberal Democrats for the Brisbane seat of Ryan. So yes, I am having a crack at politics. We need fewer career politicians in Canberra and more real people with real world experience. I'm still going to be on social media a lot, sprouting my views and showing you bits of the campaign. So please make sure you're following me on Facebook and YouTube at The Other Side Australia, as we won't be on the Discernible platform next year. So I am opening up my personal Facebook page for the election, so you can find me there and friend me there at Damian Coory. So one of our most popular early pieces on the show was way back in early February when we brought you our view on the spat between Craig Kelly MP, who was still with the Liberal Party back then, and Ali Langdon, the host of the Today Show. On commercial television this week, we got this.
Well, he's, quote, a dangerous fool and a threat to the COVID response of the nation. Those are just some of the scathing reviews of federal member for Hughes, Craig Kelly, over his unfounded and inaccurate comments on the coronavirus.
Did you catch that? Unfounded and inaccurate. That's from Dr. Ali Langdon. Oh, hang on. She's not a doctor. She's a TV presenter. Sorry, host of a thing called The Today Show. So she's obviously an authority on immunology. Carry on, chaps.
Gee, I tell you what, you're fighting with everyone at the moment. I hear you just had a Barney with Tanya Plibersek in the press gallery. Is that true?
Look, I've been very disappointed about the Labor Party making this a partisan issue and attacking me and smearing me and slandering me and actually misrepresenting what I say. All I've been done is posting peer-reviewed articles, the opinions of expert professors and medical experts from around the world. The idea that I've somehow been, posting misinformation is absolutely misinformation itself.
That's not true, Craig. I mean, I spent time online last night and have managed to debunk every one of your theories. They're not peer-reviewed. They're not peer-reviewed. I don't even want to get into this because, you're the only person saying this. We've got to listen to our doctors and our scientists. Don't you need to pull your head in?
Right, well, yes. Who do you think you are, Mr. Kelly? An elected member of Parliament quoting valid scientists and research or something? This is Professor Alison Langdon you're speaking with here, and she doesn't want to get into the details, because details are hard. She's happy to just believe what the experts and bureaucrats say, and that is her right, no problem. But we're also not allowed to challenge those experts, apparently, because that might make our brains hurt. Heaven forbid we should be able to hold 2 conflicting ideas in our brains at once. But do carry on, Alison.
Now, if you only pick up today's papers, the Sydney Morning Herald, Australia's most senior immunologist, Emeritus Professor Robert Clancy, someone that was actually awarded an Order of Australia for his services to immunology and medicine, he has said, and I quote, Craig Kelly is absolutely right. Now, that's our most senior immunologist. So the idea that I completely and utterly reject the idea that I'm out there putting any theories forward. I'm not putting any theories forward at all. Now, yes, some of the studies that I've posted are still undergoing peer review, but many of them have actually been through the peer review process. In fact, I would say the majority of the studies that I've posted have been through the peer-reviewed process. And just because something
that is just not true, Craig. I mean, one of the studies you quote, it's a Bangladeshi plastic surgeon.
I guess Bangladeshi plastic surgeons aren't doctors. Ali will be apologising to the Bangladeshi community and all plastic surgeons now, no doubt, after that double slur.
I would like to take my medical advice from someone who is knowledgeable in infectious diseases, is an epidemiologist.
Well, that's right. Well, you should listen.
One example
in that case, you should listen to Professor Robert Clancy. He's our most senior credentialed immunologist in this country. So that's who I believe we should be listening to. and he has said, and I'll quote exactly what he's wrote.
You've already quoted it, Craig.
Well, no, I haven't. He also said here, this is very important. He said, from uncertain beginnings, an impressive database has more recently been accumulated that strongly supports the use of hydroxychloroquine and or ivermectin. Their use in concert with the vaccine, so this is not an anti-vax position, when their use in concert with the vaccines can no longer be denied. In fact, this is the only science-based opinion. Now, they're not my words. That's not my words. That's not my
study
theories.
You're referring to. That study you're referring to, because this is important.
To any study. You are misrepresenting what I'm saying.
I did my research, Craig, as you asked us to do. You need to listen for a moment.
But hang on,
ivermectin is a wonderful drug. You are right. If you have scabies or river blindness.
You obviously haven't read. I'm sorry, you are not listening to our. You've got to listen to the science. You've got to listen to.
Are you a scientist? Are you a scientist, Craig? I'm not.
I am.
I'm not.
I have just quoted the senior immunologist in this country, the most highest credentialed immunologist in this country. Now, are you saying that he's wrong?
I'm saying the chief medical officer. Every global medical body in the world has rejected the use of those drugs.
That is incorrect.
Craig.
That is incorrect.
But you know what? I actually didn't want to get you on here to determine whether or not what you're saying is true or not.
But you are, I'm sorry, with greatest respect, you are making false statements that you are accusing me of. And I have a right to defend them.
You know what? Freedom of speech is one thing, Craig.
You said that everybody in the world, and that is simply untrue. The medical bodies in India use ivermectin. They have it in their standard protocol.
Craig.
I've seen a study recently published, a peer-reviewed study in the American Journal of Medicine that has a treatment protocol that includes both hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. So to say that there's no medical body in the world that approves this, I'm sorry, is incorrect.
He's right. It's disputed, but he's right. And sometimes you have to stand up and fight, just like Craig Kelly did. Langdon didn't back down because she was wrong, however. Like all good 21st century TV hosts, she kept right on going, saying she'd conducted her research, which she clearly hadn't done if she's missing the studies that it took me less than an hour to find and which I just shared with you. The consensus does not support those studies, but they are real studies and they are valid in the mix of the scientific debate. Instead of a balanced, objective approach, Ms. Langdon did what so many left-wingers do when they're losing an argument. They go for the emotional win and play the man instead of the ball.
Craig, we have seen deaths from COVID. We've seen sickness. We've seen mass job losses, hundreds of billions of dollars spent in government stimulus. All our hopes are riding on a vaccine. You need to be quiet.
Well, if you don't want to listen to our most senior qualified
I am listening to them, and I think you need to start listening to our scientists and our doctors, Craig.
Our scientist is our most senior qualified immunologist in this country, Professor Robert Clancy, and you are not listening to him. I'm sorry.
No worries, Craig. You're in a position of responsibility, and I think you're failing in that duty.
And I'll continue to speak the truth and tell the truth.
It'd be nice if you started.
If the media want to
Thank
misrepresent my position, I'm going to come on and I'm going to defend it, because I will not have slander and smear and said against me when the facts are incorrect.
Okay, Craig.
The immunologist Robert Clancy is an emeritus professor from the University of Newcastle, Australia. That's the expert that Kelly was trying to explain to Tanya Plibersek was the main source for his comments. So ABC Radio Newcastle interviewed Professor Clancy this week, and he backed Mr. Kelly.
On that issue, and there are many issues that Mr. Kelly has that I don't understand, but on that issue, my view is he's absolutely right, that there's overwhelming evidence that hydroxychloroquine works. The studies now are just under 20,000 patients, and these are not counting the country studies, because many countries are using these across the board. But the important thing is that it's used in very early disease. It's like treating any viral illness. As I understand it, Mr. Kelly has actually followed a lot of the literature, and I think he understands that, because when he says that hydroxychloroquine has a place in early treatment, I would think there are many people around the world, very, very senior people across the world, that would totally agree with that. And then I think his other drug is ivermectin, and that's a drug that came in a little later. And it missed the the political turmoil that hydroxychloroquine got tied up with when Trump used it. And that's been gaining ground, and the recent data that's coming out for that it's really very persuasive, and many countries now are picking this up.
And that was Professor Robert Clancy, the immunologist referenced by MP Craig Kelly. He's an emeritus professor of the University of Newcastle. Science is complex. It evolves. It is not always black and white. But for the Labor lovies in Australia now, it seems that we cannot even debate or discuss science anymore. The science is settled. I mean, science always agrees 100% on everything. When in history has scientific consensus ever been found to be wrong? We have to go with the best science that we have at any given moment in time. And that's why a study on ivermectin, and yes, more studies on hydroxychloroquine and all of the vaccines are so necessary. So please, dear politicians and government officials, could you kindly stop treating Australians like we're all children? Thank you. The week after that piece aired, I headed down to Melbourne to meet Matt for the first time face-to-face, and the last time for the year, unfortunately. We had a day together before I had to bolt because of the Valentine's Day weekend COVID outbreak saw Dan Andrews shut down the state, and Queen Anastasia of Queensland shut the Queensland border, so I couldn't get in back home. This left me stuck in the great state of New South Wales, from where we brought you episodes 23 and 24, including this piece on mass hysteria. If it seems like we may have lost our minds, shutting down entire states over a viral pandemic which hasn't yet seriously affected the wider Australian population, it may be because we've actually lost our minds. I'm not joking. I wish I was. The only thing more irrational and crazy than Dan Andrews locking down Victoria for 5 days this week was other states like Western Australia and Queensland, which locked anyone who'd been in Victoria out. We're coming to you from New South Wales this week because I left Melbourne on Friday before the lockdown started, but I can't get into Queensland unless I agree to go into a 14-day lockdown in a government centre. And that's not going to happen. It's insane and it's unnecessary. So I can't see my kids or go to my home. We no longer live in a free and united country. But my problems are nothing compared to people who've lost their livelihoods, their businesses, their jobs, or their health. Not because of COVID-19, but because of our bureaucrats and politicians' overreaction to COVID-19 and very bad policy decisions. In Australia right now, there are only 12 people in hospital with COVID. Not one of them is in intensive care. We've had 0 deaths nationwide for almost 2 months. The 7-day rolling average death toll has been 0 for almost 4 months. Since the pandemic began, the number of people under the age of 70 to die from coronavirus in Australia is 58. The number of people under 80 is 216. That's awful. It's a horrible illness. And there is such a thing as long COVID and after effects for those who've had it. But we've now tested 13.5 million people. That's more than half the population, at $100 a pop of taxpayers' money, I might point out. And only 29,000 people have tested positive, and the vast majority of them have either had a mild illness or no symptoms at all. There's also no scientific evidence that lockdowns are keeping us safe. There's a lot of evidence that they're doing great harm. Firstly, they harm our nation in that they bring a restriction of fundamental human rights and civil liberties and a kind of policing and enforcement that's not welcome, normal, or healthy for a modern liberal democracy. Secondly, they harm our economy. Florists and restaurants and all the jobs that they create and the businesses that serve them have suffered enormously from Dan's short, sharp circuit breaker lockdown over the Valentine's Day and Chinese New Year weekend. McGowan and Palaszczuk's lockdowns of Perth and Brisbane were similarly useless and damaging. And most of all, lockdowns affect people's mental and physical health, often with very serious consequences. Lifeline Victoria says it's had a huge spike in calls to its emergency hotline service. This is not funny. Dan, Mark, Anastasia and Scott are not keeping you safe. Our isolation from the rest of the world, the huge size of our country and our relatively small population is the main things keeping us safe. And the fear-mongering hype coming from the premiers about a super fast-spreading UK strain is a big exaggeration. One person with the normal strain might infect probably one other person. One person with the UK strain will infect about 1.4 people on average. So what's going on exactly? Well, a new paper published this week in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health may have the answer. The paper is called COVID-19 and the Political Economy of Mass Hysteria. It argues that media and government repetitively driving negative messages may have resulted in a collective hysteria that's contributed to policy errors by governments. What's really interesting about this paper is that it says that while mass hysteria can occur in societies with small government, there exist certain self-correction mechanisms that will limit harm, like people's passion for the property rights and liberties and things. But in a more government-dependent welfare state like Australia, mass hysteria can be, quote, much worse and self-reinforcing when the negative information comes from an authoritative source, when the media are politicised and social networks make the negative information omnipresent. Sound familiar? In summary, these authors, 2 economists and 1 social scientist, say that the bigger the power of government in a state or country, the more of a nanny state that you are, the worse the hysteria effect is. Senior economics reporter for The Australian, Adam Crichton, wrote about this study this week, saying that Australia and New Zealand have incurred costs equivalent to a world war and more than any other nation on earth has, all to fight a pandemic that's killed not even 1,000 people between both nations, most in their mid-80s. And this is widely seen as brilliant. Crichton writes, having insisted early last year that lockdowns were necessary just to flatten the curve, rolling capital city snap lockdowns of millions of people have now become the norm, at extraordinary economic, psychological and social cost, without a single person in intensive care across either country. Adam Crichton appeared on Alan Jones' show on Sky News this week to discuss the study. Here's a short clip from that interview.
And the paper says this produces mass psychosis. That's an illness where people become disconnected from reality. It's true.
Yeah, look, certainly I find it amazing people actually debate whether we have overreacted or not, because our society is actually structured from first principles to overreact massively, whether it's our own biology, which tends to overreact to threats, or the mass media, which of course benefits from the negative side of stories. And then, of course, there's social media now that spreads those stories faster than ever. And then, of course, the political class itself actually benefits, if you like, from the overreaction.
Yes.
The pecking order of the public sector rises up when it crushes the private sector. The standing of politicians increases, the standing of bureaucrats increases. So, you've got all these incentives for a massive overreaction, and that's what I think we now have around the world.
Well, see, you and I have said this for months. We're not saying anything new. The research paper now confirms what we've been saying, and I quote from it. They have instilled, this is government, fear in the general public to achieve political goals, exploiting the negativity bias of the human brain. I mean, basically scaring people to make sure they comply with government edicts, eh?
Yeah, look, there's 2 great examples of that. Firstly, there was a phrase that the virus doesn't discriminate, which politicians have been saying for months around the world, and we know that is absolute rubbish. I mean, it massively discriminates, this virus, in terms of who it targets. We know that now. And then the second one is this so-called highly virulent strain from the UK. Sorry, I almost laughed because, as you well know, it's infected almost no one in Australia, and yet it's all we hear about all day. The increase in debt in Australia is actually bigger than any other Western country. It's quite extraordinary. You hardly ever hear that in the press. You just hear all this self-congratulation, and aren't we brilliant, aren't we amazing?
Yeah, that's the point. It's all seen as brilliant. This is brilliant.
Yeah, that's right. It's all seen as brilliant.
And that's The Australian's Adam Crichton speaking to Alan Jones on Sky News this week. You're watching and listening to The Other Side Australia with Damian Coory, your weekly podcast summary of Australia's best news and commentary of the week from a sensible centre-right perspective. Lots more to come on the show this week, so please stay with us. In a moment, we'll discuss the crisis in media following the huge response to our segment last week on Craig Kelly's dramatic interview with The Today Show. We have more clips of interviewees telling interviewers that they've had enough of media bias to show you. Donald Trump acquitted. Again, we'll explain what that was all about. And our Liberalism Education segment this week will feature YouTube star Dave Rubin and the story of his journey from the left to the right, something I know a lot of you will relate to, as I do. And we have a great reset in our comedy segment today. All of that is still ahead, so stay with us on The Other Side Australia. As I mentioned earlier, The Other Side will be sadly leaving the Discernible platform at the end of 2021, hopefully returning somewhere in 2022 after the election on our own platforms, in which I'll be now running in the federal election, of course, as a Liberal Democrats candidate for the seat of Ryan in Brisbane. And I'm running to win because we have to bring real experience from outside of the political inner circle of Canberra elites to save this country. During the election campaign, I'll be posting lots of random short videos and commenting on stuff. So right now, if you'd please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Other Side Oz, and or on Facebook at facebook.com/TheOtherSideOz, or just search us up. Then be sure to click follow on Twitter to follow us and like on the Facebook page. The Facebook page looks like this. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernible. Matt's still going to be producing some great stuff on both YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernible, it isn't actually The Other Side anymore. So we do need you to go onto our own separate page. So you've got to find those pages. Be sure to stay in touch with me throughout 2022. It's going to be a lot of fun. During the campaign, I'll be posting behind the scenes stuff so you can see what a campaign is like. And then if you could kindly subscribe to us on YouTube, our YouTube page looks like this one. And again, you need to find our page, not our folder on the Discernible page. You've got to find the Other Side Australia page and subscribe directly to that and click the bell so you get notified when we put up new content. I really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have links sent to your phone when I upload new content. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost@gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. In episode 24 of The Other Side, we took a look at the premiers as they seem to be trying to grab more and more power. And we began to really question the proportionality of Australia's COVID response. I grew up in Joe Bjelke-Petersen's Queensland as a rebellious youngster appalled by the police state that surrounded me. Since a lot of kids today seem to think a police state is a good thing, here's a look at what a peaceful protest looked like in Queensland during the state of emergency in 1982. And I apologise to our podcast listeners who can't see these images, but I do need to show them to make a quick point.
Righto, you kids. I heard you swearing. I'm putting you away. No! Here they come down the street. You know they think they're pretty neat. They're gonna stop our music cause they say it's too loud. Then they begin to mingle in within our crowd. How we love you. The sirens above you. Think you're tough. You ought to cut cops.
In the 1980s, we saw some horrible stuff happening to our friends. Police verbaling, where corrupt police would just arrest people and make up stuff they said when appearing in court. Raids on the homes of journalists and young activists who dared to speak out against the government, and the planting of drugs on them sometimes. The police involved ensuring that they made a maximum mess of the homes while they were raiding them. The complete banning of street marches and the imposition of the state of emergency. Worst of all, the gerrymandering of the electoral system, so that Sir Joe could hold on to government with just 18% of the Brisbane city vote, and a person from rural Queensland's vote could be worth as much as 5 times a city person's. Now, I'm a conservative-leaning classical liberal. Joe was a fantastic economy builder and free market liberal. He was a great leader in many ways, but he had zero respect for the conventions of liberal democracy. In fact, he may not have even understood them. He was charming in his naivety in some ways, but he was surrounded by and taken advantage of by others who were much more criminal and evil. It all made for a fantastic period in the Brisbane underground music and arts scene, but it was small consolation. It all came crashing down for Joe in the late 80s when some brave journalism and a couple of defiant pollies helped launch the Fitzgerald inquiry into police and electoral corruption. The system changed, and we soon had a good centrist Labor government to reform everything under the brilliant young Premier Wayne Goss. So forgive me if I find today's rebellious youth a little bit pathetic at standing up for civil liberties and human rights and preventing the politicisation of the police force. Australia's 3 Labor premiers are every bit as guilty of using the police force as a political tool as Joe Bjelke-Petersen ever was. And they do it in a much more sneaky way. This was how Melbourne police managed an anti-vax protest on the weekend. Now, if you don't like anti-vax protesters, just imagine in your mind right now any group of citizens campaigning peacefully for your favourite cause. And ask yourself if this is a little on the overkill side of things.
In Sydney, a far more peaceful show as protesters marched with their message.
Could the contrast be any more clear? Melbourne, a 21st century Labor Party state, versus Sydney, not a 21st century Labor Party state. So where are all my old lefty mates from the 80s? Sadly, a lot of them are either in the government bureaucracies who are doing this, many at a senior level, or they're cheering from the sidelines. They and their political party have clearly lost their way since late last century. If you still doubt whether the policing is politicised or not, let's take a look at a bit more of what happened in Melbourne this weekend, courtesy of our friend, the real Rush Khan.
Irrespective of our race, our religion, our culture, we are here today gathered because we do not consent.
Ooh, terrifying. Now, I don't support the anti-vax movement, but I do support liberty. So my opinions overlap there with these people, and I respect 110% their right to peacefully protest, whether they're anti-vax or just anti-coercion or force-vax or just pro-liberty. They were peacefully protesting. There was nothing scary about this event. It could have been a staff picnic and would probably have wrapped up and everyone would have gone home without incident had the police not shown up. So is this the kind of response that we think is proportional and acceptable from our police service in what's supposed to be a free and liberal democracy? Apologies to our podcast listeners again, but those of you on video now, take a look. It's called kettling when police surround protesters. It's a tactic you might use at a violent protest to isolate the troublemakers, not just to create trouble unless you want to, for political purposes. 20 people all up were arrested and charged.
Demonstrations have taken place in all the major cities before the COVID vaccine rollout begins on Monday. Victoria Police says 15 people will receive penalty notices.
Now compare that with the way police handled this protest in Melbourne on Australia Day. It's all very civilised and peaceful, and the police, a much smaller number of them, remain far back and respectful. No unnecessary provocation. Now, I'm not complaining. That is how protests should be handled. Let the people express themselves, even though I strongly disagree with this group. But this leaves zero doubt that the Victorian Police Force is applying double standards based on political grounds. And that is what makes this the same, and maybe even worse, than the Queensland I grew up in. What's also concerning to me as a former journalist is the lack of concern from the media or the Journalists' Union, the MEAA, about this sort of thing. Melbourne Herald Sun reporter Olivia Jenkins and senior photographer Jake Nowakowski were led away by police in handcuffs as the anti-vax demonstration was unnecessarily moved in on by the police. Are Victorian police unable to tell a reporter from a protester? She's the one who looks like a reporter, with a press pass around her neck and a notebook in her hand, and with the guy who's a photographer from her newspaper beside her. It's the Keystone cops on hyperdrive down there. I'm a very pro-police kind of person, but this isn't policing. This is full-blown police state-style political bullying. And Olivia is a mainstream media reporter. God help you if you work for an even slightly controversial independent news outfit like Avi Yemeni from Rebel News, who had this experience this week trying to cover Dan Andrews' news conference at Victoria's State Parliament House.
So the Premier called his press conference for 10:15 a.m. in Parliament Gardens. So I got there a few minutes early. Hey, go, mate. We're here for the press conference.
Where are you from, mate?
Rebel News. There you go. Can you see my ID?
What news was it?
Rebel News.
The media pass there, mate?
Yep.
Oh, I see.
After a couple minutes, security came to the gate, double-checked my media accreditation, and let me in. But as I approached the garden where the rest of the media were waiting for the press conference to begin, a different group of PSOs suddenly surrounded and stopped me.
Can't be here. Not a Parliament grounds. In the interest of security and good order of Parliament.
Sorry?
In the interest of security and good order of Parliament, as an authorised officer under Parliamentary Precincts Act, we're asking you to leave.
Hold on, so I want to understand. So this is a press conference. The media is...
In the interest of security and good order of Parliament.
It's not communist China. You can't shut down certain media.
Actually, it is like communist China. And what's astounding is that not one of those journalists standing under that tree turned a camera or their interest to the news story that was unfolding right under their noses. Not one. In the 1980s, as a young reporter at 3AW down at State Parliament, we'd have been all over it.
I'm happy here. I'm going to wait because what he's trying to do is actually unlawful. We're not in... You don't have to like our network, but you can't expel us from a press conference. Then suddenly I see Daniel Andrews himself walking towards me. Mr. Premier, do you think it's okay for the media to be shut down at your press conference just because they criticise you? Mr. Premier, are you okay with this? This seems a bit like communist China, not Victoria. I didn't realise at the time why he didn't even look my way, as if he was purposely avoiding me. But as you're about to see, not only is the Premier okay with it, his office ordered my removal. I've never seen such a thing from a Democratic leader, removing journalists they don't like.
Neither have I. Now, a lot of you will probably be saying, oh, that's Avi guy, whatever, he's from Rebel News, aren't they a bit right-wing, whatever that means anymore? But that's not the point. The point is there were 6 police officers looking military and menacing and behaving like pure bureaucratic robots, implementing the orders of a premier who believes he's above scrutiny in front of a press pack that is suffering from groupthink on a level I've never seen in my professional career outside communist countries. And the Australian Journalists Association, part of the Media Entertainment and Arts Alliance, are nowhere to be seen. We asked for a comment and got no reply. Nor is the Police Association asking why their members are being used as a political enforcement body. Why? Well, maybe it's because they're unions, not real professional associations, and it's left-wing politics they'd have to stand up against here. If you're a member of the MEAA like me, or any police association in Australia, I'd urge you to complain and have your voice heard before it's too late. The job of police in a liberal democracy is not the suppression of peaceful protests or the propping up of politicians. It's the prevention of violent crime. I think the real Rushkan illustrated the hypocrisy brilliantly in this video, comparing the non-arrest of violent gang members with the arrest of an anti-lockdown protester back in September.
Relax! She's got anxiety! Relax! Relax, she's sick! She's actually sick! Relax! Hey! Relax! Relax!
On that evening, it was deemed by the tactical police commander at that time that the most appropriate approach was to disperse those youths. We had our operational response unit, our public order response teams there, and they were dispersed. Would I have liked to have seen people arrested at that time? Yes, obviously, if we could have, I would have loved to have seen more people arrested then, because we just dispersed the group. But let's not second-guess that tactical commander on the street. So I support what they've done. We've now got a subsequent investigation flowing into that, and that investigation will continue to determine whether we can arrest anybody.
really do hope that the left is starting to wake up to what's going on here. This should be stuff that the anti-authoritarian left and the anti-authoritarian right can unite upon. Unfortunately, Australia is not the only place where this is happening. Fox News' Tucker Carlson this week reminded us of some incidents in Canada and the UK.
This footage, for example, was shot New Year's Eve in the Canadian city of Gatineau. A group of friends gathered in a private home. No one was selling fentanyl, no one plotting a homicide. Just a group of relentlessly polite Canadians celebrating the new year. Apparently somebody called the police, and here's what happened next. Well, that's pretty shocking. But what happened after that may be worse than the footage you just saw. The police fined everyone at the gathering $1,500 apiece, and then they arrested the owner of the home. Now, he wasn't charged with attacking a cop or spreading COVID, which no one claimed he did. No. His crime was described as, quote, refusing to provide personal information to the authorities. So they barged into his home, and when he didn't answer the right questions quickly enough, they arrested him. Now, that is not a public health measure. It is intentional humiliation. Canada's so-called Liberal Party didn't have a problem with any of this, neither did the supposedly liberal Prime Minister. No one in Canada seemed to. And not just Canada. The entire Anglosphere is moving toward authoritarianism, though nobody seems to be noticing. In the formerly free UK last weekend, a group of people in West Midlands created what authorities later described as, and if you've got kids at home, we want to warn you, this could be shocking, a, quote, makeshift club with a bar, VIP area, and a dance room with a DJ. Yes, a DJ. So naturally, the authorities sprang into action. They dispatched a thermal imaging helicopter. They kicked down doors. It was a threat worse than ISIS, and they acted like it.
Police! Nobody move! Police! Get dragging off the back. No joke! No joke! What's this for taser? Stay where you are! Stay where you are! Everybody stay where you are!
Stay where you are, get in there. Stay in there.
Everybody keep calm! Everybody keep calm!
And a good friend sent me this video meme yesterday of a cute kid in the US explaining what COVID means to her. I started thinking she was so cute when I was watching it, and she is, but then it just made me really, really sad.
Now everything in this world has to shut all the way down to nobody has to go anywhere because of their shutdown. The ice cream truck is shut down. And the water truck place is shut down, which is my favorite part because it is my favorite one.
What's that?
Yeah, it has the gumball one where there's gunballs and there's like blues. And now they have to shut all the way down and we can't go anywhere. Not even McDonald's, which is my favorite restaurant.
McDonald's is shut down too. You can pick up McDonald's in the drive-thru.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
You can. You can go in the drive-thru, but you can't go on the playground.
Yeah, it's just really frustrating. If you go through the drive-thru, it's just boring because you have to wait for your food to come. And if you're inside playing on the playground, it wouldn't be boring.
Yeah.
And now they have to shut down. It's just boring when you wait for food to come.
Yeah.
And now everything in this town has to shut all the way down. And I just don't want it to do that. I mean, why would germs come around to people if they don't want germs to come around to them?
I know.
Because everyone doesn't like germs because they get sick and everything has to be shut down for everybody to be safe.
Yeah.
And it's just not fair because everything that is fun also has to be shut down.
Yeah.
And the only thing that is open is nothing. Nothing!
What are we doing? Why are we doing this? At least the centre-left and centre-right can be united on this, since we all support liberty, don't we? One of the left's favourite writers and social commentators certainly thinks so. Naomi Wolf is a well-known lefty, not someone you'd expect to see on Fox News, but she's a wake-up to what's going on. And she told Tucker Carlson this week that under the guise of a real medical pandemic, we are now moving into a coup situation, a police state situation, she says.
As you say, that transcends everything you and I might agree or disagree on.
Right.
That should bring together left and right to protect our Constitution. We're absolutely moving into what I call step 10. I wrote a book in which I pointed out there were 10 steps that would-be tyrants always take when they want to close down a democracy. Whether they're on the left or the right, they always do the same 10 things. And now we're at something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. You described it really, really well. It is step 10, and that's the suspension of the rule of law. That's when you start to be a police state, and we're here. There's no way around it.
Tucker Carlson then asked Wolf why she thinks a lot of people are not seeing what's going on. She said people are seeing it, but we're not organised enough to do anything about it.
I'm in touch with many patriots from all backgrounds and all walks of life who are horrified. I interviewed, for instance, Moms for Liberty, a group of conservative moms in Florida who are mobilizing to try to get schools open. They're so worried about what's happening to their kids. And I talked to Mom Jen Say, a famous gymnast and activist in San Francisco on the left, who's also a mom who's horrified. I've interviewed doctors. I've interviewed, ordinary people, restaurant owners from all walks of life who are absolutely unable to even articulate their fear and horror, recognizing that the state has now crushed businesses, kept us from gathering in free assembly to worship, as the First Amendment provides, is invading our bodies, as you mentioned, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, is restricting movement, fining us here in New York State. I could be fined $15,000 a day if I gather people, more than 10 or 25 people, depending on where in New York State I live. There is no real science underlying a lot of these closures. It's because autocratic tyrants at the state and now the national level are creating a kind of merger of corporate power and government power, which is really characteristic of Italian fascism in the 20s, and they're using that to engage in kind of emergency orders that simply strip us of our rights to property, rights to assembly, rights to worship. This has all been very sudden. And when you look back, March of 2020, a lot of things started to move that kind of locked into place a set of policies that are kind of 360-degree full-on totalitarian policies. So I think a lot of us are kind of in culture shock. Luckily or unluckily, I've been studying closing democracies for 12 years. So I recognized early on, once I realized New York State had emergency powers, I know from history that no one gives up emergency powers willingly. They always drag it on and drag it on. And so every month I'm getting in my email an announcement that Governor Cuomo is extending emergency measures. Only from studying history do I know how predictable it is when you start to have elected officials say we are not going to follow the Constitution because there's a pandemic.
Wow. That's former Clinton advisor, author and social commentator Naomi Wolf. And that was from episode 24 of The Other Side from back in February, bringing us to the end of the first of our summer series episodes and episode 78 of The Other Side Australia. We'll see you next week for episode 79, number 2 in our summer series. As I mentioned earlier, The Other Side will be sadly leaving the Discernible platform at the end of 2021, hopefully returning somewhere in 2022 after the election on our own platforms, in which I'll be now running in the federal election, of course, as a Liberal Democrats candidate for the seat of Ryan in Brisbane. And I'm running to win because we have to bring real experience from outside of the political inner circle of Canberra elites to save this country. During the election campaign, I'll be posting lots of random short videos and commenting on stuff. So right now, if you'd please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Other Side Oz, and or on Facebook at facebook.com/The Other Side Oz, or just search us up. Then be sure to click follow on Twitter to follow us and like on the Facebook page. The Facebook page looks like this. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernible. Matt's still going to be producing some great stuff on both YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernible, it isn't actually The Other Side anymore. So we do need you to go onto our own separate page. So you've got to find those pages. Be sure to stay in touch with me throughout 2022. It's going to be a lot of fun. During the campaign, I'll be posting behind the scenes stuff so you can see what a campaign is like. And then if you could kindly subscribe to us on YouTube, our YouTube page looks like this one. And again, you need to find our page, not our folder on the Discernible page. You've got to find the Other Side Australia page and subscribe directly to that and click the bell so you get notified when we put up new content. I really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have links sent to your phone when I upload new content. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost@gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. Written and authorised by Damian Coory from Toowong, Queensland.